In Monroe, a small town nestled just south of Detroit, life once moved to the steady rhythm of industry and community. The town's streets, lined with modest homes and local shops, echoed with the laughter of children and the hum of daily routines. For decades, Monroe was a place where neighbors knew each other by name and the future felt secure. At the heart of Monroe stood the steel plant, a sprawling complex of brick and steel that was once the heartbeat of the community. Its smokestacks rose above the town, a symbol of strength and prosperity. For generations, families like David's built their lives around the plant. Fathers, mothers, and even grandparents clocked in each morning, forging steel for American cars and securing a stable future for their children. The plant wasn't just a workplace, it was a source of pride, a place where hard work was rewarded and dreams were built. But in the spring of 2025, everything changed. The winds of economic policy swept through Monroe, bringing uncertainty and fear. Headlines spoke of new tariffs and shifting markets, and the town braced for impact. New tariffs, intended to protect American industry, instead drove up the cost of raw materials. Steel prices soared, and the plant's managers struggled to keep up with the mounting expenses. What was meant as a shield became a burden. Suddenly, Monroe's steel was too expensive for Detroit's automakers, who began sourcing cheaper materials elsewhere. Orders that once filled the plant's schedule vanished almost overnight, leaving workers and their families in limbo. The plant, once alive with the clang of machinery and the chatter of workers, fell silent. Conveyor belts stopped, and the echo of footsteps faded into memory. The closure wasn't just the loss of a factory, it was the collapse of Monroe's identity. The plant had shaped the town's culture, its economy, and its sense of purpose. Workers like David, who had been promised protection and stability, were left with pink slips and a future clouded by uncertainty. Families gathered in kitchens trying to make sense of what had happened, wondering how they would pay their bills or put food on the table. The town's backbone was broken, not by foreign competition, but by policies meant to help. Small businesses shuttered, and the once busy Main Street grew quiet as hope faded from the faces of Monroe's residents. Rust crept over idle machines, and the once busy chimneys stood cold against the gray sky. Weeds grew where workers once gathered, and the plant became a monument to what was lost. The promise of revitalized manufacturing dissolved into mass layoffs and despair. Lines formed at the job center, and families faced choices they never imagined. For Monroe, tariffs weren't just policy. They were a devastating blow that rippled through every home and every heart. The community's spirit was tested as neighbors rallied together, searching for answers and support. The town, built on steel and the dreams of its people, now faced a future with its very foundation gone. Monroe's story is a reminder that behind every policy are real lives, and the cost of change is often more than numbers on a page. The 2025 tariffs were supposed to boost American jobs by making imports pricier and encouraging domestic production, but the reality was a shock. Tariffs on steel and aluminum sent costs soaring for manufacturers. Factories like Monroe's couldn't compete, and automakers stopped buying their steel. Across the country, businesses faced impossible choices: absorb higher costs or pass them to consumers and lose out to foreign competitors. Ironically, it sometimes became cheaper to import finished goods than to make them in the US. The result? Hundreds of thousands of jobs lost, with unemployment rising. For towns like Monroe, these weren't just numbers, they were families out of work. The shield meant to protect workers ended up cutting them the deepest. The plant's closure sent shockwaves through Monroe. It wasn't just a factory, it was the heartbeat of the town, providing jobs and a sense of purpose for generations. Main Street businesses, diners, hardware stores, lost their customers and struggled to survive. The once bustling streets turned eerily quiet, with "for lease" signs becoming a common sight. Families like David's faced tough choices: which bills to pay, which groceries to skip. The kitchen table became a place of stress and difficult decisions as they tried to stretch every dollar. Dreams of college faded, replaced by the urgent need to keep the lights on. Young people, once hopeful about their futures, now found themselves shelving textbooks and turning off lights to save money. The average American household lost thousands, but in Monroe, the loss was deeper: security, stability, and hope. Families felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them every day. Community programs and youth sports lost funding, and anxiety spread. The places where children once played and learned were now empty, echoing the town's despair. The local food bank saw record demand, Lines grew longer each week as more families found themselves in need of basic necessities. The pain rippled outward. Trucking companies, suppliers, and service providers all suffered. The interconnected nature of the economy meant that one closure led to many more. Monroe's story was echoed nationwide, as the intended benefits of protectionism gave way to widespread hardship. Towns across the country faced similar fates, with closed factories and empty streets. The interconnected economy meant one plant's failure triggered many more. Business owners and workers alike felt the cascading effects, as supply chains ground to a halt. The fabric of the town and the nation began to unravel. The sense of community and shared purpose that once defined these places was replaced by a pervasive sense of loss and uncertainty. As Monroe struggled, the world was changing. America's aggressive tariffs pushed allies like Canada and Japan to seek new partnerships. Canada withdrew from U.S. trade talks and deepened ties with Europe and the Pacific. Japan led efforts to expand the Trans-Pacific Partnership, building trade networks that excluded the U.S. These moves weren't just symbolic, they were strategic, insulating economies from American unpredictability. The U.S., once a global leader, found itself increasingly isolated as others built new alliances. The tariffs, meant to project strength, left America alone in a shifting world. The auto industry, meant to benefit from steel tariffs, was hit hard. Automakers rely on global supply chains, and tariffs drove up costs for parts and materials. Ford lost billions, and others faced similar losses. Companies had to choose absorb costs or raise prices and lose customers. Ironically, it became cheaper to import finished cars than build them in the U.S. The policy backfired, weakening the industry it aimed to protect. Money that could have gone to innovation was spent just to survive. The engine of American manufacturing began to stall. America's tariffs sparked swift retaliation from trading partners. Canada, Japan, and the EU targeted iconic U.S. exports, whiskey, orange juice, soybeans, with their own tariffs. Kentucky distilleries and Florida farmers saw sales collapse as foreign markets dried up. China stopped buying U.S. soybeans, devastating American farmers. The result: lost market share, falling prices, and family farms on the brink. Retaliatory tariffs rewired global supply chains, making it hard for U.S. producers to recover. Trade, it turned out, was a two-way street. The backlash left American exporters struggling to compete. In a trade war, there were no winners, only loss. As the U.S. turned inward, the world built new trade networks. The CPTPP, led by Japan and Canada, flourished without America. Member countries enjoyed lower tariffs and easier access, while U.S. exporters faced barriers. American farmers and manufacturers found themselves at a disadvantage, not for lack of quality, but because of missed opportunities. Canada and Japan also struck major deals with the EU, creating vast free trade zones. U.S. businesses were locked out, unable to compete on equal footing. Trade routes and investments shifted away from the U.S. America, once the architect of global trade, was now on the outside looking in. By August 2025, the consequences of protectionism were clear. What began as a promise to shield American jobs and industries had, over time, left a trail of devastation across the country. The silence of once bustling factories echoed the hopes that had faded away, replaced by uncertainty and loss. Monroe's shuttered plant was just one example of a national crisis. Across the heartland, entire communities watched as their economic lifelines disappeared almost overnight. The ripple effects were felt far beyond the factory gates, touching every corner of daily life. The workers meant to be protected faced job loss and uncertainty. Many found themselves searching for work in shrinking job markets, their skills suddenly obsolete. Families who had relied on steady paychecks now faced difficult choices about their futures. America's global leadership had faded, replaced by isolation and mistrust. Once a central player in international trade and diplomacy, the nation now found itself on the outside looking in, as former allies forged new partnerships and global influence shifted elsewhere. Rebuilding lost trust and market share would take years, if it was possible at all. Businesses that once thrived on exports struggled to adapt, and the absence of foreign investment left entire sectors stagnant. The sense of opportunity that once defined American enterprise was replaced by caution and doubt. At home, growth slowed, inflation rose, and families struggled with higher costs. Everyday essentials became more expensive, stretching household budgets to the breaking point. The dream of prosperity felt more distant than ever for millions of Americans. The promise of a manufacturing renaissance gave way to economic decline and division. Communities once united by shared purpose now found themselves fractured. as frustration and blame replaced hope and cooperation. The future looked uncertain, with communities stretched to the breaking point. Local leaders scrambled to find solutions, but resources were scarce and options limited. The sense of security that had defined small-town life was slipping away. The cost of protectionism was no longer theoretical, it was a daily reality. For many, the struggle to put food on the table or keep a roof overhead became a constant worry, as headlines about the economic crisis became personal stories of hardship. For towns like Monroe, the bill had come due, and the scars would last for generations. The legacy of economic isolation was not just measured in lost jobs or closed factories, but in the lasting impact on families, communities, and the nation's sense of itself.